Okay, so let's begin. So we'll mainly talk about hyperbolic geometry today. So hyperbolic geometry, the main objective of this talk will be to develop an intuition regarding hyperbolic geometry, to understand the need of hyperbolic geometry and characterize different type of geodesics on it, and to develop an intuition how it would look like. So and do various analysis on it and discuss different models of it. So the first basic question which occurs is, what is geometry? Now, geometry is more than just the vanilla Euclidean space we all live in and we all study till 12th. Uh, Geometries can be thought of as intrinsic study of manifolds. So a n-dimensional manifold is basically a space which locally looks like Rn, but globally it can be curved. It can have various variations. Now, a very naive definition of geometry is that it is a study of spaces with a notion of distance between points. As you have all studied metrics before, I'll assume you have the knowledge of metrics. So, okay, now geometry is also the study of properties such as lengths, angles, curvature, which are the very finer properties. Okay, now a more modern viewpoint of geometry. So, Klein was the first one to talk about geometry in terms of groups of space transformations. So a group of space transformation, let me give an example. So suppose you have Rn, suppose you have R2, your Euclidean plane, your plane Euclidean plane, and you have, let's say, a group such as rotation, right? So it transforms a space. So suppose I have a group which, suppose I have the group of rotation, and I take an element which rotates a point by by 90 degrees, say. Okay, so a line passing through origin will be converted into this line, which also passes through origin, and which is at a 90-degree angle from it. So it transforms the space. You can apply this group to the whole space. You can define action of that group on that space. Now, the Erlangen program was basically started by Klein to talk about manifoldness and associated group of transformations. Projective geometry was emphasized as a unifying frame for all other geometries, since it was the least restrictive. For example, the most restrictive of all is Euclidean geometry, and then the affine geometry is less restrictive than the Euclidean geometry, and the projective geometry occurs on a more general scale, and it is the least restrictive among the ones I mentioned earlier. So he also considered group theory the most useful way of organizing geometrical knowledge, as it uses algebraic methods to abstract the idea of symmetry. Now, for example, the example I gave you regarding the space transformation of rotation, let's say, or reflection, you can see you can see that when you apply them to the space, they give you useful information about it. So they give you information about symmetry. Now, Klein made much more explicit the idea that each geometrical language had its own appropriate concepts. So, for example, let's say you have projective geometry, in which you talk about conic sections, but not about circles or angles, because they are not invariant under projective transformations. The way that multiple languages of geometry came back together could be explained by the way subgroups of symmetric group related to each other. So suppose you have a rotation group, you have a reflection group, and how they interact with each other gives us the information about the space, give us the inherent properties of the space. So that's a more modern viewpoint of geometry. Now, the reason is why hyperbolic geometry. I assume all of you know about the five Euclid axioms, and at that time people thought of axiom as the one which seemed very obvious to them, the statements which seems very obvious to them. So the fifth one, which was that given any line L, suppose take a point P not lying on that line L, there exists a unique parallel line passing through that point parallel to the line. So basically, this statement seemed less obvious to people, and they wanted to know if they could prove the fifth postulate from the first four. Now, the thing was, when you say something is an axiom or something is not, you want to prove there exists a consistent system with or without it if it is an axiom, right? So, another motivation for hyperbolic geometry is, in one sense, there are only three main geometries based on the curvature. So, One is the Euclidean space we all live in and we all study. One is the spherical geometry. It has a constant positive curvature. The other is the constant negative curvature, which we are going to study, which is the hyperbolic geometry. Now, there can be many arbitrary geometries, but there's a very subtle reason to it why we consider these three as the main geometries. So, also another motivation for hyperbolic geometry is various group actions yield interesting results. So, the group actions on the Euclidean geometry is very vanilla. So, you don't have interesting spaces resulting from it. But group actions on, let's say, hyperbolic plane, I'll define hyperbolic plane in some time. So, you will see that it has various amount of it is very interesting results. So to name a few, there is a modular tree. Another is fundamental group of close orientable surfaces with genus greater than one. I've talked about it in my lecture, in my surfaces lecture, what all this means. That is, a fundamental group is a group of equivalence classes of loops up to homotopy. Homotopy is a continuous deformation. Close means without boundary. Orientable surfaces. Orientable means you can give a consistent choice of normal vector at every point. So, the action of fundamental group of close orientable surfaces with genus greater than one is very interesting. We'll see why. Also, another motivation is the group of orientation preserving isometries has a very nice natural structure, a matrix group. So we'll see later what this whole sentence means. The group of orientation preserving isometries. Moving on, just a second. A little bit of history. So Euclid was the first to formalize geometry into an axiomatic system. The fifth axiom, called the parallel postulate, which I mentioned earlier, was a main focus of study. People tried to prove it from the first four and failed, and there was a very good reason behind it. So Gauss was the first one who found a consistent geometry with an assumption that the sum of triangle is less than two right angles. That is 180-degree. So suppose you take the assumption that the sum of angle of triangles is less than two right angles. Then you can create a consistent geometry in which fifth postulate does not hold. Gauss did not publish this work, but he was the first one to discuss about it. And non-Euclidean geometries were getting popularized around this time, that is 1800s and 1900s. Okay, so let's talk a little about Euclidean geometry. Now, because of our familiarity with Euclidean geometry, there are often issues surrounding our definitions that we do not realize need to be proved. So, for example, you take any 2 points x and y, and you define a straight line to be the straight line basically represents the shortest path from x to y. Now, there are two parts to it. First is that there exists a shortest path. Second is that this straight line is a unique shortest path. So these two statements have to be proved and can be easily proved. There is a field called calculus of variations which you can use to prove them. There exist many ways to prove them also. Like for example, you can consider the groups and see their actions. We'll see later. We will prove this for hyperbolic geometry, and you can basically modify that proof to give a proof for Euclidean geometry. So consider spherical geometry where the above is not true. So let me annotate. So consider a sphere and wait, let me change the colors and consider any two diametrically opposite points, right? So we know that the shortest distance between them is a semicircle that runs along the surface of the sphere. Now note there exist infinitely many such semicircles. So the uniqueness part is false here. So there exists geometry where this postulate does not hold. You don't have a shortest path, a notion of shortest path, and it may not be unique. Okay, so let's move on. We'll revisit the question now. What is geometry? One convenient meta definition is due to Klein in his Erlangen program, which is basically given a set with some structure and a group of transformations that preserve the structure. Geometry is the study of objects that are invariant under these transformations. For example, take the two-dimensional Euclidean geometry. The set is R2, and your notion of distance, your structure, is of the Euclidean distance function defined by between 2 points x1 y1 and x2 y2. It is defined by x1 minus x2 whole square plus y1 minus y2 whole square. Okay, I'll not write it right now. So this is your Euclidean distance function given giving a distance between any 2 points x1 comma y1 and x2 comma y2. And you talk about group of transformations, for example, rotations, translations, reflections that preserve the distance between points, not necessarily reflections. We will define hyperbolic geometry in a similar way. We take a set, define a notion of distance on it, and then study the transformations which preserve this distance. Now, note that what we want to do with geometry is basically go with an intuition in mind, and through calculations, through computing and proving stuff, we will develop a crispier intuition. So by the way, in formal logic we say that the set equipped with the notion of distance, that is the metric, is a model of the geometry. So R2 equipped with the Euclidean distance function is a model of Euclidean geometry. Okay, so let's move on. So some terminology first. You have seen how to calculate a metric using distance function. Here is another way. So a metric on an open subset U of Euclidean plane R2 is a method of computing arc lengths L of sigma. Sigma is your curve. As per the formula, ds square is equal to fxy dx square plus gxy dy square, where fxy and gxy are scaling factors in a sense. Thus, the length of sigma will be given by the formula. So you can just integrate it from 0 to 1. You normally take the interval to be 0 to 1 of the parameterization. So suppose you are parameterizing the curve by xt comma yt, where t goes from 0 to 1. So the length will be given by 0 to 1 ds. Just plugging the formula, the metric into it gives us 0 to 1 integration fxt comma yt dx by dt whole square plus g of xt comma yt dy by dt whole square whole root dt. So now, so this is the length of any given path in any arbitrary geometry that we specify by a given metric. So now isometry is a map that preserves the metric. That is, I denote isometry by I. So suppose I of xy is x1 comma y1, then basically fxy dx square plus gxy dy square is equal to fx1 comma y1 dx1 square plus gx1 comma y1 dy1 square. So it preserves the distance between 2 points. The length of curves. So a standard way of giving a notion of distance between 2 points. Now we have developed a notion of length of the path. Now what we want to do is give a notion of distance between 2 points. Now what we do is basically, suppose you have 2 points. You have this point, this point. You take piecewise smooth curves on it. Suppose this, this, and you measure the length of all such curves, and you take the infimum. This is called the resulting infimum is called the distance between the 2 points. So, for example, in the Euclidean geometry, the distance between, let's say, 1 comma 0 and 2 comma 0 is 1. In our for example, like if you take this path, okay, so just remove start it here, and you take this path. So this path is the minimum over all such curves. You can prove easily. There is no problem in that. In our context, okay, so what a geodesic is, we will call a curve geodesic if it minimizes the distance between its endpoint. So for example, the straight line. So this straight line is a geodesic between the 2 points. Similarly, an arc of a circle is a geodesic between 2 points on a sphere. Okay, let's move on. A model for hyperbolic geometry. So we want to say we want to have a set x equipped with a metric, and then we will study groups of transformations related to it. So a model for hyperbolic geometry is the upper half plane. We will always consider the complex plane. So we will have the upper half plane, that is imaginary part of z is greater than 0. So for example, this is your complex plane, this whole region where imaginary part of the complex number is greater than 0. And we equip it with the metric dx square equal to 1 by y square of dx square plus dy square. That is, we take f of xy equal to g of xy equal to 1 by y square. Now, motivation for it is not very. So, Poincare was the one who discovered it. Poincare came to this model from complex analysis. So it is a fact that any simply connected means you take any, the fundamental group is trivial. That is, you take any loop on the surface, you can always contract it to a point. Always, okay. So the only simply connected complex one manifolds are the Riemann surface, the Riemann sphere, the complex plane, and the upper half plane. So upper half plane was a very natural idea to study it. So the boundary of this model, okay, so observe the boundary of this model includes a real line, and we ought to add a point at infinity. So you may know that you may have seen this, a real line plus a pointer at infinity will essentially topologically make it a circle. So the boundary will is essentially a circle. So okay, what else? Uh, so a motivation for 1 by y square is that the group of isometries we get from this is the most natural matrix group to consider. The real motivation though comes from curvature. The one I told you that there exists three main geometries. This is a negative curvature one. Okay, let's move on. So let's talk about hyperbolic length. So given a curve, it is basically a function from AB to hyperbolic upper plane with parameterization xt comma yt such that xt and yt have continuous derivatives. So the hyperbolic length of sigma is obtained by integrating the function fz equal to 1 by imaginary part z, just as we saw, just plugging it into this formula. Just one second. This formula. So it will be x. So you can just plug fxt comma yt and gxt comma yt to be 1 by y square, and you'll get the length of curves in hyperbolic geometry. So let's see what it is. So the length in hyperbolic upper plane hyperbolic geometry of sigma, if sigma was a curve, is equal to integrating 1 by imaginary part of z over sigma, which is equal to integrating a from a to b sigma dash t modulus by imaginary part of sigma t. Let's see how this comes by. So let's see. Okay, so here suppose you have basically what this is equal to x dash t plus y dash wholes y. Just wait a second. So this is basically x dash square plus y dash square. This is y. Excuse my writing. Whole root. That's a modulus of a complex number. So this is sigma dash t modulus of sigma dash t, and imaginary part is just y. So you're integrating this essentially by y dt. Okay, so hope this is clear to you how this is the same thing as before. So given any z and z dash in H, we define the hyperbolic distance again to be the same notion of distance we considered earlier. That is the infimum of length of all piecewise smooth curves that has endpoints z and z dash. First exercises you should verify that this distance function obeys triangular inequality. The second exercise is to find the length of straight paths from iota to 2 iota. This will tell you how paths are uh, placed, how far the points are. So let's try to compute it first. I'll do one case of iota and 2 iota. So what you do is essentially integrate from 1 to 2. Wait, I have already done the computation. Let me just show it. Okay, so here's the computation. So integration. So okay, so let sigma t be it, where t goes from a to b. So this is a path connecting iota a to iota b. Straight line connecting iota a to iota b. Let me just replace those points. Okay. Now, so basically sigma dash t is equal to iota. So sigma dash t modulus is equal to 1. So it is equal to so the integration will be equal to 1 by imaginary part of sigma of t, which is t dt from a to b, which is ln b by a. Okay, so we see that ln log b by a is essentially the length of the curve, length of the path between two points IA and IB. Let's see its implications. So suppose let's say we consider points iota. Wait a second. We consider the points iota, 2 iota, 4 iota, and backwards iota by 2, and so on. Basically, iota by 2 to the power n for any n natural number. Notice the distance between any two consecutive of these two any two consecutive points in this sequence is ln2. So iota and 2 iota have distance between them ln2. Similarly for iota and iota by 2, and iota by 2 and iota by 4. So essentially, as you're moving towards the real axis, these points are getting farther away from you, and as you're moving away from the from the real axis, these points are getting closer to each other. Okay, so we all see that how we now have a general we have an intuition of how points are placed, how points would look like if we were on the hyperbolic plane. So, as we go farther towards the boundary, points look very far away because between iota and iota by 2, ln2 distance, same between iota by 2 and iota by 4, and so on. Okay, let's return to our previous slide. Uh, where is it? Okay, so we found a length of straight path from iota and iota to 2 iota, and similarly for other ai to bi. You can do the same for minus I plus minus 1 plus I to 1 plus iota. Okay, let's move on. Now the group of transformations I talked about, we will consider basically SL2R, which are matrices from with real entries having determinant equal to 1. Exercise, why is this a group? This should be an easy exercise since you were introduced with group theory. Second exercise, okay, so now what we do is define a action of this group on a on the space on a topological on a space H. So on the upper half plane. So we will define, so you suppose you have a number, suppose you have a matrix A, B, C, D. Call this M. We define a group action from SL to R to the space H. H is your hyperbolic plane. By so M dot Z. Z is the element of hyperbolic plane, upper half plane, equal to this formula: AZ plus B by CZ plus D. So every matrix M in SL2R gives rise to a natural a function, right, which is a curve essentially. Now, not a curve, but it gives rise to a function. So sigma, we call this let's say gamma. So gamma m, which represents this function, is from h to h, given by gamma m of z to be this az plus b by cz plus d. Fun fact: this is called Mobius transformations. You might have heard this before. So let's talk about it. By the way, we will eventually prove that this group is the only orientation preserving isometry for the metric. We have shown what an isometry is. That is, it preserves the lengths. We will see now how it preserves the lengths. By the way, and orientation preserving I will define later. Okay, so we see that this group of transformation space transformations we can take as SL2R by taking a very natural group action of any matrix to the of SL2R to H, the upper half plane, by this function, which is a Mobius transformation. Okay, so we talked about lengths in hyperbolic. We talked about hyperbolic lengths. Now let's talk a little about hyperbolic distance and how these Mobius transformation affect the distance. By the way, I have already spoiled that it is an isometry. So that's what we are proving right now. So given sigma is a curve. So given sigma is a curve. So observe that this is also a curve. Gamma m of z. So z is misplaced here. It should be gamma m of sigma z. Similarly here, here, and here. It should be gamma m of sigma then z in bracket z. So we compose this sigma by gamma of m, the unique Mobius transformation defined by the matrix. So what happens to the length? Let's observe. What is the length L of this curve? It will be L. We want to find L lambda m of z, lambda m of sigma, which is equal to 0 to 1. Rho is basically our 1 by imaginary part of z. Rho of 1 by basically 1 by imaginary part of gamma m of sigma t modulus, and this and within modulus gamma m z, gamma m of sigma dash. So basically it is essentially the same as this by imaginary part. We have just substituted gamma of sigma in this particular formula, which has only sigma in it. We have just substituted sigma by gamma m of sigma, because gamma m of sigma is also a curve, and we want to look at the length of that curve. Okay, so plug in the value of gamma m and apply chain rule. So chain rule in complex analysis works similarly as you think it should. So given a suppose, so basically f suppose, so how you say that if you have a differentiable function in real analysis, you define a counterpart of it in an analog of it in complex analysis, which is holomorphic functions. But really holomorphic functions mean a lot more than just differentiation. You can approach a point by any side, from any place. Basically, I'll not talk much about it, but when you read about complex analysis, you'll see that if f is a holomorphic function, and suppose sigma is a function from 0 1 to complex numbers, then this whole dash will be equal to f dash of sigma times sigma dash. Just how it should work, how we expect it to work. Okay. Then when you apply the chain rule and plug in the value of, just a second, and plug in the value of gamma m of sigma, you will find that these both lengths are same. So you will find that length of sigma of gamma m of sigma is same as length of sigma. So this implies that Mobius transformations are isometries. So if our matrix group preserves the lengths, it preserves distance. Can you convince yourself that this is the case? Because preserving lengths would mean preserving the distance. It is a fun exercise. You can just try yourself. Okay. Are these the only isometries? The answer is no. You can. So this exercise basically shows that consider this function z equal to x plus iota. So consider this function lambda of z to be minus x plus iota y for any z x plus iota y. Notice this is not a Mobius transformation of H. Prove by plugging in the formula of the length that this is also an isometry. That is, the length of gamma of sigma is same as length of sigma. So Mobius transformations are not the only isometries. Fun fact: an easy to prove statement. Inversion about semicircles which have center in the real axis is also an isometry. So suppose you must have heard about inversion in your normal Euclidean geometry. So suppose this is our let's say semicircle centered at origin. So basically, given a point, let's say this is a point P, you join this to origin. Then suppose this distance was, let's say, A. We want a point on this line which has distance from the origin B, such that A into B is equal to R squared. R square. R is the radius of this semicircle. So inversion is a very rich theory. If you want to go deep into it, you can study about it. So this inversion basically maps circles to lines and lines to circles. So okay, let's see. So basically, let's find a formula for this. It is easy to see that this function g of z equal to r square by z conjugate. This will be so you consider this point. Suppose this was the point. Also note, if a point is outside the circle, then its inverse will be inside the circle and vice versa. So this point, let's say, is equal to r into e to the power I theta. R is basically your b. So suppose this point was, okay, let's prove it. Suppose your point was, suppose p was r e to the power I theta. Okay, e to the power I theta. Then this point, let's say g of p has, so suppose, so this, its modulus is equal to r square by small r, by definition of our, uh, by definition of inversion, and into e to the power iota theta, because it makes the same, it lies on the same line. Okay, so e to the power iota theta. Okay, so suppose this point was z, p was z, so z equal to r e to the power I theta. So essentially you have e to the power I theta equal to z by r. So this becomes capital R square into z by small r square. Small r is a modulus of this g of p, sorry, of z. That is this is equal to mod z whole square. And since z by so mod z whole square by z equal to z conjugate, so you get this formula gz equal to r square by mod z. Uh, Plug this formula into your length formula, and you will observe that this is also an isometry. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about geodesics. So basically, you want distance minimizing, length minimizing curves. This is the first point is a formal definition of it. I'll skip it for now. But basically, geodesic means two points which are connected, and you find a curve between them which has a infimum over all lengths. So it is a so now there are many things to prove. There are many things to observe first. There are many questions right now. In hyperbolic plane, does geodesic exist at all? If it exists, is it unique? Okay, so we want to prove that there is a unique geodesic between any two points, and we want to know how geodesics looks like in the geodesics look like in the hyperbolic plane. Okay, now here are some statements. Just a second. There is a wait a second. Okay, it is written that meeting will end for all participants in 5 minutes. I don't know why. Has Cisco added a free free time limit like 40 minutes? Okay, I'll start a new one after this then. I'll continue for now. I don't know. I don't know. I'll continue for now, but then when once it ends, I'll post a new link. Okay, so let's talk about. Wait a second. Geometry view presentation. Okay, so let's talk about Mobius transformation some more. So note Mobius transformations map the set of all circles centered on the real axis and all vertical lines. I'll call this set the set of clients. So Mobius transformation map clients to clients. Proved by a simple but heavy equation bash. Basically, any general equation of a client can be noted can be so any client can be denoted by a z z bar plus bz plus cz bar plus d equal to 0. I am not sure about that, but this is your general equation of Klein, I guess. So basically, apply Mobius transformation to it. Write az plus b by cz plus d instead of z, and then after after resolving, after simplifying, you will get that the new equation is again in this form. So Mobius transformation map the set of all circles. So maps clients to clients. Okay, given any 2 points, now another property is that given any 2 points in the hyperbolic plane z and w, there is a k belonging to r and a matrix m belonging to sl to r, such that when you apply that Mobius transformation induced by that matrix to z, then z goes to I and w goes to ki. Okay, basically both points are mapped to the imaginary axis with z mapping to I. Okay, so first of all, we need to consider different subgroups of SL2R. So consider these three subgroups. Note the it is easy to verify they are all subgroups of SL2R. Now, basically, when you apply them to your point, let's say, for example, if we take the action of this particular matrix on a complex number z, this will give us z plus x by 0 z plus 1. So that's essentially z plus x. So this translates a point. This one gives us root a z plus 0 by 1 by root a. So that's a times z. So it dilates a point. You can easily verify that this rotates a point. Okay, so now what we want to prove is that we can always map 2 points to the imaginary axis, with one point being the being iota. Okay, let's prove it. So suppose this was your upper half plane, ZW. What I do is basically apply translation to move Z to imaginary axis. So my new image looks like this is Z somewhere on the imaginary axis, and this is point W. Now I use the dilation matrix to contract Z to iota. Since it is on the imaginary axis, I contract Z to iota now. So my new image will be this Z is on iota, and W is somewhere on the plane. Now, if it is on the imaginary axis, well and good. Otherwise, just rotate this point by the rotation matrix and bring it to some ki. So basically, your center of rotation will be this Z, and you rotate W uh, along this arc centered at Z till you get to imaginary axis, which imaginary axis, a point which is above iota. So essentially, you get a k belonging to R, such that uh, gamma m of W is ki and gamma m of Z is I. So we prove this. Okay, so let's continue. We see that any 2 points we have, uh, so any 2 points we have Z and W in the complex plane can be mapped in the upper half plane, can be mapped to our imaginary axis, right? And we also saw that Mobius transformation just maps a set of all circles centered at the origin and all vertical lines to the same set. Okay, so let's continue. Now we have reduced the problem to the case of 2 points in the imaginary axis, right? So let sigma t be so we have seen this particular computation of calculating the the length of the path that is a straight line that lies in the imaginary axis from ai to bi. So let's prove that this is actually the lower bound and this is the distance between those 2 points. Okay, so let sigma t be a general curve xt plus iota yt with continuous derivative xt and yt such that they have continuous derivatives from 0 1 to h, which is any path from iota a to iota b. Then length of sigma will be 0 to 1, will be the integration 0 to 1 by definition of length. It is an integration under root from 0 to 1 under root x dash t square plus y dash t square by yt dt. Now note this is greater than equal to mod of y dash t by yt dt. Just whenever x dash t is identically equal to 0. So this is we get first inequality. This equality occurs if and only if x dash t is 0. So x dash t is 0 means xt is constant, and since the path started from ia and ib, that is we have imaginary we are on the imaginary axis, so the whole path remains on the imaginary axis. This is the first inequality. Second, this mod y dash t is greater than y dash t, so we have this inequality. This the equality here occurs if y dash t is strictly positive for all t. That is, the curve is injective. That is the we remain on the we remain on the imaginary axis, and moreover the curve is injective. So which now this can be easily computed to be log b by a, and we have shown that we can achieve this lower bound. Okay, so we have shown that between any 2 points on the imaginary axis, we have a unique hyperbolic geodesic. But now, since now the same follows for any 2 points on the hyperbolic upper half plane, because so suppose this is your upper half plane, you have any 2 points z and w, you map this here and this here from to the imaginary axis. You get a let me use different color. So you get this particular curve. Okay, so this is your curve between the imaginary points. Now, what you do is basically take the inverse of that Mobius transformation to get a geodesic between these 2 points. So, and that since Mobius transformation preserves lengths, hence it also preserves distances. So that so this geodesic, which was unique, will also remain a geodesic which will be unique. Okay, hence between any 2 points there is a unique hyperbolic geodesic. Now, what does these geodesics look like in the hyperbolic plane? Okay, so we saw that set of all semicircles centered on real axis as well as all the vertical lines will be mapped to itself when using Mobius transformations. Now, we claim that this particular set of lines is exactly the set of all geodesics. Now, see, when you took 2 points, so basically you had this straight line in your, so imaginary axis was a geodesic, right? And you took a Mobius transformation of it to translate it to any geodesic of any other 2 points, right? That means the set of geodesics sits inside the set of all semicircles centered on real axis and vertical lines. Is it clear to everyone? I hope it is. Now, this is the whole set because you can just take 2 points. So, suppose you were given a curve. Here I call this H, this particular set. So, suppose you were given any curve in H. Suppose you were given this curve in H, and you take 2 points on it. So, you take these 2 points. Now there is a unique curve in that set, in the set of semicircles centered on real axis and vertical lines that joins these 2 points. Hence, this must be the geodesic. Convince yourself that this is the case. What we get is that this set, which is a set of semicircles centered on real axis and vertical lines, is exactly the set of all geodesics. First, we proved that the set of geodesics sit inside this set, and then we prove that this is exactly the set. Now, what we have is now between any 2 points, suppose you are given this is a upper half plane. Now, given any 2 points, suppose this is Z and this is W, which have the same real part, then the unique geodesic between them is a straight line, as we know. This is a straight line between them. If the 2 points, let's say these 2 points are not on a straight line, that is it, this is a Z, this is a W, then the geodesic is basically an arc of semicircle which is centered on real axis. So it will be like this is a semicircle centered on real axis. Suppose center is somewhere here. So this is the unique geodesic. Wait, this is the unique geodesic, the arc of semicircle. Now suppose you have a point Z and a point at infinity. So suppose we have a point at infinity and we want to join Z to the point at infinity. What we do is basically start at Z and take a ray pointing vertically upwards and just extend it infinitely. So this will be a geodesic between Z and the point at infinity. Okay, now we see how geodesics look like in the hyperbolic plane, right? We have developed an intuition of how hyperbolic plane behaves. Okay, let's move on. Now, now we observe that Euclid's parallel postulate fails. Why? Because suppose you are given this particular line, let's say this vertical line, and take a point P not lying on it, then there exist infinitely many geodesics through that point P that do not intersect the given geodesics. You can just construct infinitely many semicircles, right? So there are infinitely many geodesics through P that do not intersect the geodesic H. Okay, so what we have dished in the fifth postulate is a uniqueness property of the geodesic, of the parallel geodesic. We have not said that there exists no geodesic. Like the part which says that there exists a geodesic still holds, but the uniqueness of it is not is does not hold anymore in this model. Okay, so let's move on. Returning to the metric. Why did we choose a function 1 by imaginary part of z? Well, the group of Mobius transformations of H is a very rich group with lots of interesting structures. Now, I've given an exercise which shows that if we want Mobius transformations of H to be isometries, then we must define the hyperbolic length the way we have. That is by choosing 1 by imaginary part of Z with a scaling constant. So I'll just walk through this exercise once. So let rho. So here let rho be from h to r be a continuous positive function. Now note rho is equal to 1 by y in our 1 by imaginary part of z. So in our case of hyperbolic geometry. So let rho be from h to r be a continuous positive function. Define the row length of a path sigma by this particular formula, which is the same as how we expect it to be, uh, how we how we developed the notion of lengths in hyperbolic half plane. Basically, this rho was 1 by imaginary part of z earlier, and so this formula would be 1 by imaginary part of sigma, imaginary part of sigma. Right, we want to prove that sigma should be 1 by imaginary part of sigma, 1 by imaginary part of z up to some scaling constant. Okay, so suppose that the length rho is invariant under the Mobius transformations of h. That is so that's what we want. Actually, we want to show that if we want the group of Mobius transformations to be the group of isometries, then we have to choose the row like that. So that is, if suppose a gamma belongs to Mobius of H, then length row of this curve gamma of sigma is equal to sigma, right? So using the so use this so you can prove so this is our assumption. Now using this you can prove, by the way, one fact that if you have, you are integrating rho over all curves sigma, and it this gives you 0, then rho will have to be 0. Okay, use this also to prove that row of gamma z modulus of gamma dash z is equal to rho of z. Okay, now gamma was our Mobius transformation. So first let's take gamma to be the translation part, that is z plus b for b real. So when you plug that in, you observe, plug that in the first part. After proving the first part, you get rho of z plus b into so your gamma dash z becomes 1. So basically it says rho of z plus b equal to rho of z. So note, by altering b with a suitable scale, that is taking it to be the minus real part of z, you can prove that rho z is equal to rho y, where y is the imaginary part of z. So rho of z depends only on the imaginary part of z. Hence we may write rho of z to be rho of phi. Uh, so we may write rho of z to be rho of y, where y is the imaginary part. At last, by taking so here, so this should be corrected. Wait a second. This should be gamma, taking gamma of z to be z plus b, because that was our Mobius transformation. And here also, by taking gamma of z to be kz, the dilation matrix, deduce that rho of y should be c by y for some constant c greater than 0. This should be an easy exercise. So hence up to a normalizing constant c, we see that if we require the Mobius transformation of hyperbolic upper plane to be isometries, then the distance in hyperbolic upper plane must be given by the formula we gave initially. That is 1 by imaginary part of z. So this was a motivation of considering 1 by imaginary part of z. A quick note, so this part I cannot prove because of the time limit, but you may ask me for the proof after the talk. So basically what the theorem says is the hyperbolic plane is conformally flat. What this term means is that the angle between any two geodesics is the same as a Euclidean angle. Okay, so suppose you have this, just a second. Okay, so suppose you have this straight line and this geodesic, suppose this geodesic. Then the angle between them suppose theta is the same that would have been in the Euclidean in the Euclidean space. Okay, so you can prove this. Basically, there is a very subtle reason behind it. I'll not prove it right now. Also, now note, I'll define orientation. What is orientation preserving? So let K be a hyperbolic triangle in upper half plane with vertices A, B, and C labeled anti-clockwise. So suppose you have these 3 points. This one, this is one, this is two, this is three that are labeled anti-clockwise, and I take a map of map. Suppose I take a function, a map of the space to the same space. Suppose gamma is my map, and this maps the triangle into three other points. Let's say this, and this, where the orientation, that is, the vertices still come in the anti-clockwise order. So suppose this was one, this was two, then this would be three. Okay, so if this happens, then we say that gamma was orientation preserving, right? So if gamma reverses orientation, suppose the new points would have orientation clockwise, then we say they are orientation reversing. Okay, so theorem is the only orientation preserving isometries of the hyperbolic plane are Mobius transformation. How you basically prove is, this is consider you consider the hyperbolic cosine function and do some analysis with it. You can ask me for the proof after the class. Okay, so let's move on. Let's find. Okay, now what is the area of a triangle in a hyperbolic plane? That's a natural question to ask. Now, area of triangle with angles A, internal angles ABC, is pi minus A minus B minus C. Now, that is very surprising to me, at least. So basically, given let's say, so basically, your similar triangles, that is the triangles with with same internal angles, same measure of angles, have equal areas. So all similar triangles are congruent in hyperbolic plane. We will show this for the case when at least one vertex. Okay, let's outline a proof of this. So let's outline a proof of this. First of all, we want to prove that Mobius transformation preserves area. Okay, how do we define the angles in hyperbolic geometry? Was it done? Okay, we define hyperbolic geometry. The basically we define the angles in hyperbolic geometry just as same in the Euclidean space. We look at we look, so it's given to geodesics, we look at this angle. The angle will be the same, like the angle is the same angle we refer to as in the Euclidean space. There is no difference to it. Okay, so as said before, take a vertex. Okay, so first of all, we want to know what is the area of subsets, area of triangles. So first of all, we have to develop a notion of area in hyperbolic space. So let me first move on to a slide. Okay, so here area of subset is given by this formula in upper half plane. So the motivation comes from, suppose this was our upper half plane, this was y, the imaginary part. Take a very small rectangle around it. Suppose this was A, this was B. Then the area is obviously A B by y square. Okay, so the area will be AB by y square, and this motivates us to set the area of a subset A to be this formula, because given any subset, you can use rectangles to tile it, and then you sum the areas using of all the rectangles using that were used to tile the subset. Now the notion of area of subsets is a very complicated topic which comes in measure theory. I myself, I have not studied about measure theory. So the least things I know is that so there is a something called Borel sets. So this A has to be a Borel set for you to define area on. So I won't go into much rigor issues. So basically, you can understand. Basically, you can have nice subsets, and you can define the area of those subsets in this way, in this manner. That is 1 by imaginary part z whole square dz, double integrating this over the whole subset A. Okay, now let's return to the problem. Now, prove using Mobius transformation that Mobius transformation preserves the area by showing that they take the set of rectangles to itself and preserve their area. So first of all, we'll talk about the set of how Mobius transformation affects the set of rectangles. So suppose we had this rectangle, this. It can even be this. Okay, let's suppose this particular rectangle. Now, we know clines map to clines. So these semicircular arcs will map to semicircular arcs or lines. So essentially, it will again be a triangle. You can just work out the small details that are left to fill in to prove that Mobius transformation map the set of rectangles to itself, and you can apply the definition of Mobius transformation uh, to show that it preserves the area of rectangles by just showing like double integrating over, we said double integrating over a, so going from x to x1 to x2, y1 to y2, and 1 by imaginary part of z whole square dz. So basically apply a Mobius transformation to it, replace z by az plus b plus cz by d, and you can show that Mobius transformation preserves area. Okay, so now what we will do is basically take a vertex to boundary. Okay, so suppose we are given these 3 points A, B, C. What we do is basically map this C to the imaginary. So suppose this was C, to the real axis, to a boundary point. Okay, by Mobius transformations. Now you get now what you have is basically 2 points. Oh, by the way, when you reach this point at at the real axis, you apply dilation to it, again a Mobius transformation, to move it to the point at infinity. Now we have C at infinity, so our triangle would look like. Wait, let me show here. So our new triangle will look like this. This is the geodesic between A and B, and these are points connecting to the. So as I said, geodesics connecting vertices to point at infinity are straight lines. So our this is our triangle right now. This is our triangle. Now, what we can do is basically using Mobius transformation, we have this arc between A and B. Uh, this arc center is suppose at a real point, let's say A. Then we can apply a Mobius transformation to uh, transfer the center of that arc to origin, and then use dilation to make the arc's radius 1. Okay, so now what the end picture is right now for us is essentially, let me erase the annotations. So basically you get after applying all the Mobius transformations, you get this. Let's say, wait a minute. So this was A, this was B, and this is the arc which is centered at origin with unit with radius 1. Now we want to find the area of this subset, this triangle. This is the triangle right now, which can be easily found by the formula I suggested earlier. So just plug in. So suppose to see the limits of y, take a point x. Suppose this was x. This point will be one under root of 1 minus x square, and y goes from under root 1 minus x square to infinity, and x basically goes from a to b. This is b. This is a. Also, assume the internal angles. So basically, uh, suppose this was beta, this is pi minus alpha. So basically just write down angles and using so basically first of all you arrive at this integral, which is integration a to b 1 by 1 minus x square whole root dx. Substitute x equal to cos theta, and then using basic angle chasing prove that cos a is equal to pi minus alpha, and uh, cos pi minus so basically prove the relation between these side lengths a and b, uh, alpha and the angles pi minus alpha and beta. Okay, so you'll get, after substituting x is equal to cos theta, you'll get this integral which solves to pi minus alpha plus beta. Okay, so what we have proved is given a triangle which has two vertices, which has one vertex as point at infinity, its area is pi minus alpha plus beta. Now we prove for the general case of any given triangle ABC. So now suppose this was your triangle A, B, C. Okay. So what you do is essentially, suppose this was C. Wait, let me label these points. This is A, this is B. Now what you do is basically apply rotation across A to ensure that C lies on a vertical line passing through A. So you get this, applying Mobius transformations, you get this vertical line, and B will be at any arbitrary point in the plane. So consider the geodesics connecting it. So essentially the picture now is, let me draw the picture. Okay, just see here. Uh, Now what we do is essentially extend these vertical lines indefinitely. So basically we get triangles, that is A, B infinity is a triangle and C, B infinity is a triangle. Now note the area of ABC will be the area of triangle A, B infinity minus the area of C, wait a second, of C, B infinity, right? And we know how to compute these two areas. So writing it down and subtracting, we get the formula of triangle ABC. So you see pi minus alpha plus beta plus gamma minus pi minus. So doing the simplification, you get this formula of area of triangle ABC, which is pi minus alpha plus beta plus gamma. Okay, let's move on. Also one more thing to note. We see that the sum of angles may be less than 180 degree in the hyperbolic plane. For example, in Euclidean geometry, it is always equal to pi, that is 180 degree. But let's say given a triangle ABC, for example here, when we consider these points, that is, suppose this was our plane, we take these points A, B, and a point at infinity. Now this angle, as you can see, is essentially zero. Why? Because this circle, the semicircle, is orthogonal to this real axis. So this angle is zero. This angle is zero. So we observe that the triangles may have area less than 180 degrees, right? So this is something related to angle defects, and it is related to the property that hyperbolic plane has negative curvature everywhere. Now, curvature is basically the bumpiness of a surface. For example, a plane has zero curvature everywhere. A sphere has have a positive curvature everywhere, and the main feature of hyperbolic geometry is, suppose you take a model that is hyperbolic plane, half plane, then every point is a, let's say, negatively curved, right? So every point is a saddle point. I've shown what a saddle point is in my surfaces talk. If not, I'll show at the end of the class what a saddle point is. So essentially you, you have something like that. I can't show pictorially, but I will show a picture on Wikipedia. Wait, let me check if I have it right now. So just wait a second. Okay. What was I searching? Yeah, saddle point. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen right now. Share content, optimize for motion and video, and share the screen. Okay, so yeah, so this image basically, let me this image basically, this is a saddle point, this red point. Now in hyperbolic half plane, every point uh, acts like a saddle point. Now you can see that this is not possible. Just wait a second, let me return to my share. So we see that our the hyperbolic half plane model with that particular metric cannot be embedded into a normal 3 space. In R3 we cannot observe this particular property that every point is a saddle point in R3. However, we have come close to kind of describing it, kind of encapsulating the idea partially of every point being a saddle point, every point having a negative curvature. So there is a model called hyperbolic crochet. Let me show that. So this is a hyperbolic crochet. Uh, so the important feature of hyperbolic plane is that it has constant negative curvature everywhere. So every point looks like a saddle point. So this picture basically is called a hyperbolic. This construction is called hyperbolic crochet, and it encaptures the above idea partially in a sense. So by the way, I forgot to mention there is a corollary. Let P be a n-sided hyperbolic polygon with vertices v1 to vn and internal angles alpha 1 to alpha n. Then area of P is equal to n minus 2 times pi minus alpha 1 till alpha n. Basically, proof is you cut P into triangles and apply the theorem of pi minus alpha minus beta minus gamma minus delta, sorry, to each triangle and then sum the areas. You will get this particular formula. Okay, now let's talk about another other models of hyperbolic geometry. Now note how I said that the boundary of this upper half plane is essentially the whole real line plus a point at infinity. That makes us that is equivalent to a circle topologically. Now, so this gives us a motivation to consider a unit disk and plot our model on it, right? So so this is a particular model called Poincaré's disk model. So you have this disk which is just the collection of complex numbers such that modulus is less than 1. So this open disk is called the Poincare disk, and whenever mod z equal to 1, we get a circle, and this is called the circle at infinity or the boundary of D. Now, what we want to do is transfer the our metric from the previous model, that is a half plane model, to this disk model, so that things don't change. That much, right? So consider this map z to z minus I by iota z minus 1. It is a good exercise to check that this is a bijection between the open disk, that is mod z less than 1, and the upper half plane, imaginary part of z is greater than 0. To check a bijection, you have to show it is first injection, and then you have to show surjective. Also, you have to show that this particular the modulus of this number is less than 1. Okay, so use this inverse map to find lengths of path in this model and do subsequent analysis. So let me give you an example. So I'll share another screen right now. Just wait a minute. Hyperbolic geometry. Just wait a minute. Okay, I'm sharing another screen right now. Share content. Okay, so consider this particular. Uh, so consider this. So consider the map HZ, which is the one I just told you about. So consider the inverse of that map. So the inverse maps the open disk to hyperbolic half plane by this. The map has this formula, that is minus 8 plus I by minus iz plus 1. So now let sigma be any path in the open disk. So you have open disk path. Suppose this is a path in the open disk. What you do is essentially uh, compose it with G. So G of sigma will be a path in upper hyperbolic plane. We look at the length of that curve in upper hyperbolic plane, which is this. Let me change my colors. Which is this? Just a definition, regular definition of length, and just applying the chain rule to get G dash sigma t sigma dash t. Okay, let me just scroll down. So using the chain rule, it is easy to calculate that g dash z is equal to minus 2 by minus iz plus 1 whole square, where gz is minus z plus I by minus iz plus 1. Also, it is easy to calculate or easy to see that imaginary part of gz is 1 minus is this particular formula. So our length essentially becomes this formula. Now what we want is we want to define the length of that sigma, which was an open disk, to have the strain structure. So we define it to to be the inherent metric from that upper plane model to this open disk model. So the length of this curve sigma in the in the open disk model will be defined by this, which is equal to integration over paths 2 by 1 minus mod z whole square. This is your rho now. Okay. So again, the distance will be defined by taking the length of the shortest path between them and so on. Okay, so we have essentially transferred the distance function on h of h to a distance function on d. So we have that distance in upper disk model of hz and hw is equal to distance in upper half plane of z and w. So so now returning to my slides, just wait a second. Share content, sharing. Okay, so so this is basically an encyclopedia of things you so basically you can consider that the same metric and the length of the paths and start proving results the same way we did for the upper half plane. So this is your this is essentially your a tabular form of results that differentiates these two models. So let's talk about this first. So first of all, the set that is equipped with the metric. Wait, let me change from yellow. Yellow is a bit bright and is not visible properly. So we take the upper half plane to be imaginary part z greater than 0, and in disk we consider the open disk which has radius 1. Boundary is real axis union a point at infinity. Boundary of this open disk is mod z equal to 1, which is essentially these both are same topologically. Any length of path we already saw. Area of subsets we need not worry about. So orientation preserving isometries, we saw that Mobius transformations are the only orientation preserving isometries for the upper half plane. For the Poincaré's disk, these are the orientation preserving isometries. You can prove it. Now, geodesics, the most important part. Now, note how are geodesics for the structure of geodesic in the upper half plane model. So they were essentially semicircles that connected 2 points on the real axis, or they were vertical lines that connected a point of boundary to the point at infinity. Now the point at infinity of a open disk, of the boundary of the open disk, does not make sense. So essentially these vertical lines are this. So the analog of vertical lines are essentially the diameters of the open disk, and these arcs of circle will be the same. And so geodesics in the Poincare disk model is the diameters of d, the diameters of the open disk, and the arcs of circle that meet the boundary of d orthogonally. Orthogonally just means at a 90-degree angle. Again, both these geometries are conformally flat, so the angles will be same as Euclidean angles. Okay, now we can a very important property of hyperbolic geometry is hyperbolic plane, the disk model. Now, suppose we talk about first Euclidean plane. We want to tile this whole Euclidean plane by a small, let's say a unit square, or by small figures, by small polygons. So you can observe that there are only three uh, possible polygons that we can use to cover whole Euclidean plane. First is a square, a triangle, or a hexagon. Okay, so but whereas in the hyperbolic plane, we can have many number of polygons that can be used to tile. So this is a four-tiled hyperbolic plane. So suppose, so uh, let's see how a regular quadrilateral would look like in our upper disk model. So it will be essentially this. It will look like this. Suppose all 4 points are at infinity, it will look like this. So this 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 similarly you can use this pattern to tile the whole disk model. Here each tile is is a pentagon. You can prove this. We will not prove this right now, but this has a very interesting theory to it of Fuchsian groups, and you look at discrete subgroups of the sets of the groups of isometries. We'll not discuss about it right now, but just so you know, I just mentioned it. Okay, so let's talk about the last part of this talk right now. No, so basically, the last. So what we want to do is relate the surfaces talk with this talk. So now what I'll do is I will relate the our surfaces talk in which we talked about close orientable surfaces, other different types of surfaces to this hyperbolic geometry. Now, we now come to the study of discrete subgroups of isometric group of hyperbolic plane. Poincare initiated the study of these groups. An octagon with suitable side identifications gives a genus 2 surface topologically. So basically, this surface gives us a genus 2 surface, that is a double torus. We will see how, but let's talk about different a different thing right now first. Suppose I have a torus, right? So a torus can be seen uh, from the disk from a unit square by gluing the opposite sides by a given orientation. So you glue them in this order, and this particular model now is a torus, right? So is a torus. So what we did was we glued the sides to give us a surface right now, right? So essentially, this unit square is a fundamental domain of the torus. So the fundament. So this since this unit square is basically located in a Euclidean plane, we say that the universal cover of the torus is the complex plane. A complex Euclidean plane, which is just the flat plane, complex plane. So two things: fundamental domain, and the second is universal cover. So universal the main idea of universal cover comes from you want a simply connected means the fundamental group is trivial. That is, you take any loop, you can contract it to a point. So what you want is that your that are universal you want to study the universal cover. So you want a simply connected space that induces a covering map. So this square induces a covering map from the Euclidean normal the complex plane to your torus. So you can use this fundamental domain to tile to basically cover your whole torus. Now, I gave these notations very loosely. These are in no way very. These are in no way rigorous. So, if you want a rigorous definition, so basically, uh, a universal cover of a connected topological space X is a simply connected space Y with a map f from X to Y, which is a covering map. A covering map means surjective open map. Also, it should be locally a homeomorphism. Homeomorphism, as we pointed out, a continuous deformation which has continuous inverse. So there are various theorems related to these universal covers. I think that you should now have a intuitive idea what a universal cover is. So, for example, for the torus, it is the whole complex plane. Now, there is a thing called uniformization theorem, which states if X is a Riemann surface, then the only possible uniform cover for that Riemann surface is is either the open unit disk or the complex plane or the Riemann sphere. So essentially, the universal covers of Riemann surfaces is either open unit disk, which corresponds to our hyperbolic model, or the complex plane, which basically is the Euclidean plane, and or the S2, which is essentially our sphere, right? So, by the way, a fact that a compact Riemann surface which has genus greater than one is in particular a G whole torus. Okay, so so what we want to see is that if our surface, so basically I'll denote a surface by sigma of G. This is my surface with G genus. So I want to say that if we have a surface sigma of G and G is greater than equal to 2, this would mean that the universal cover of of our surface is the open disk model. So for example, the double torus has two holes. So we will identify the double torus from an octagon in which is sitting inside the Poincaré's open disk model. So let's see how we can get a double torus by gluing the sides of a this octagon. Let me just switch my let me just switch wait a second. I'll just play a video right now which you can see YouTube. So wait, I'm sharing the video right now. Okay, so okay, now watch this video. Wait a second, watch this video. I'll just for fast forward it a little bit. Let's say 1.25. Note this was the same surface we started with. That is the diagram that is shown. We now have to glue these sides in this particular order to give us a surface of genus 2, that is the double torus. Just watch this video. These all transformations can be done since these are continuous deformations, so there is no problem in rigor, because these are all continuous deformations which have a continuous inverse, so you can always apply them. Okay, so you see how this octagon glues together to give us a wait a second, let me share my slides back. So we see how we can glue this octagon to get a surface which has genus 2. Now we want this is a topological information. We do not care about the sides, the lengths of the sides of the octagon, or how or the angles, but now we want to transfer into a more precise geometric picture. So we first suppose that the above octagon is hyperbolic, because of that theorem that the universal cover is the open disk. So we first suppose that the above octagon is hyperbolic. That is, it is isometric to a piece of the hyperbolic plane. Now to glue it as given above, we need to ensure two things. First, the sides labeled by the same letters are geodesics of equal length. They have to be the equal length because then only gluing makes sense geometrically, not topologically. Second is the angle sum obtained at a vertex to which all the 8 vertices of the octagon are identified, excuse me, is equal to 2 pi. So this would mean that locally the surface would look like you're in a plane. So the angle sum obtained should be 2 pi. So let's do that. For this we consider the more symmetric unit disk model. So instead of looking at the upper half plane model, we look at the more symmetric unit disk model. Now consider an ideal hyperbolic octagon, that is an octagon all whose vertices are on circles at the circle at infinity. So you can see this is your octagon. Just wait a minute. This your octagon. This. Okay. Now since these all geodesics intersect since all these geodesics meet the circle orthogonally, so you have, wait, let me use a different color. You have this 90-degree and you have this 90-degree. So essentially all the internal angles of the ideal octagon are 0. Now start shrinking the octagon slowly towards the center. So you start getting a small regular octagon in the Poincare disk, ensuring that so you have to ensure that the octagon is symmetric about the origin. So basically you move all these points along these lines at the same rate. Now then a very small regular hyperbolic octagon has internal angles very close to the internal angles of a regular Euclidean octagon. which is 3 pi by 4. Hence, now we can just apply intermediate value theorem to say that at some intermediate stage, all internal angles were equal to pi by 4. And since the internal angles were equal to pi by 4, the angle sum at a particular vertex when all these are glued together will be 8 into pi by 4 equal to 2 pi. So, since all sides are equal, it follows that sides labeled by same letters are geodesics of equal length. Uh, now, we just saw the angles sum. Now, thus the identification space is a hyperbolic genus 2 surface. Identification space is just like the universal cover and the fundamental domain. So basically the fundamental domain, we say that fundamental domain of the double torus is your hyperbolic octagon, right? So the isometries of the hyperbolic plane that identify sides labeled by the same letter, that is preserving orientation, generate a discrete subgroup of the isometric group of the hyperbolic plane, such that the quotient of the hyperbolic plane by this group is a hyperbolic genus 2 surface, which is we are just stating the our result more in a more refined way. So that concludes it. Now note that the above construction is immensely flexible. You can have different types of octagons which have geodesics of equal length, and the angle sum obtained at the vertex is 2 pi. So you can have various such octagons. Thus, we get continuously many hyperbolic genus 2 surfaces by varying the above construction. So that's it for the talk. Since we have 10 minutes left, I'll talk about one more thing. As I promised to talk about modular tree. So we say, okay, we said that various group action. Okay, one thing I forgot to point out. We consider, so I denote pi. This is a fundamental group. Now the thing is, the fundamental group has a very interesting action. Since this is a group, it has a very interesting action on the universal cover. So this was, so we consider the uh, fundamental group of a surface with genus greater than equal to 2. And since uh, for such a surface, the universal cover is your hyperbolic half, the open disk model, we see that this fundamental group has a uh, action. The result of the action of this fundamental group on the hyperbolic plane is very nice. uh, Both the action, so this action is isometric uh, and properly discontinuous and co-compact. I'll not define these terms, but you can study about them if you want. These come under, you can say these come under geometric group theory a little bit. That is, group being properly discontinuous and co-compact. So the action so the action defined by this fundamental group is isometric, and it is properly discontinuous and co-compact. Just to mention it, if you don't know about this, it's all right. You can read about them when you enter college. Or so let's move on. Okay, so yeah, so let's talk about another type of group which has a very interesting action on this hyperbolic half plane, let's say. Okay, so we were always considering SL2R, right? I will call modular group to be SL2Z. So all the matrix entries of matrices are in integers. So now SL2Z, note two things. First, SL2Z is generated by these two matrices: 0, -1, sorry, 1, 0, 0, -1, 1, 1. All the matrices in SL2Z are generated by all the matrices in SL2Z can be generated by these two matrices. We want to look at the action of this modular group, that is SL2Z, on an arc in the upper half plane model. So suppose you are given this arc. I'll take this arc to be from iota, just a second, from iota to e to the power pi by 3. So this is my iota. This is e to the power iota pi by 3. Okay, so this is our arc, and we will see the action of the two matrices. First one, which I just wrote, 0 1 minus 1 0, and 0 1 minus 1 1. So these two matrices, what they do is one rotates this arc. So one rotates this arc, and the second converts this circle into a line. So this circle will go into this particular line. So suppose we have this arc, by continuous application of these groups of these matrices, we see that uh, the whole SL2Z will act on this arc, giving us a tree. A tree is essentially a simply connected graph with no cycles. So you will have this, uh, so these lines, because the second matrix will act on the circle to convert it to a straight line, and then you will have more branches, and these all branches will extend to the real line. I will show you a picture now with to conclude the talk. Let me remove these annotations. I will show you a picture of this matrix group to conclude the talk. So here is a modular tree. Let me share the screen. Share content, screen share. Okay, so this is a modular tree. As you can see, just take it. So you take one arc, let's say this, and you apply SL2Z on it. You take the group action of SL2Z on it, and you get these beautiful tree formations, which is called the modular tree. Now again, this group action is isometric, discontinuous, and co-compact. I'll remove these annotations now. Okay, so that concludes the talk. However, we have a very important thing to see. Let me stop sharing. Okay, now we have a very important thing to see, which is the most fun. So I'll show you the models of hyperbolic crochet, and in 3D. Also, I will show you the models. Basically, I will show you how the unit disk model. Okay, let me show you the unit disk model and the hyperbolic crochet. Just a second. This is the last section of the talk. After this, you all are free. Just wait a second. Mm, wait a second. My screen is unresponsive right now. I don't know why. Let me share. Just wait a minute. Just wait a minute. I'm I'm just sorting this out. Uh, there is. Um, few details. Yes. Okay. So I guess I'm now we can. Why cannot? Why cannot I? The thing is, I cannot access. Okay, I can access it now. Okay. Okay, I'll screen share right now. Share content, NVIDIA share. Okay, you should be able to see the screen right now. Now, this is a game called Hyperloop, which is essentially a rope type game which is played on the hyperbolic model. So, let me show you, let me take a guided tour. So you can download this game. This is not free, I guess, but I guess it will be available somewhere on the internet. You can download it, and you can see how hyperbolic geometry looks and feels like. So let me next slide. Okay, so here is your crochet model. Just a second. Okay. the soundtrack should is off right now, right? I'll just change that right now. Okay. Open settings, auto settings. Okay, those should be off now. Good. So this is your hyperbolic crochet. Now notice how this looks like. So this is your hyperbolic crochet. If you are able to see it properly now. So notice how every point looks like a saddle point. However, this is not exactly the whole representation of hyperbolic model. This is just a Hypersian rug model. Now I'll show you another next slide. Now we talk about the open disk model and see how uh, how the distances. So let me just read it out from the slide. So it shows the number of cells in distance 1, 2, 3, and so on from you. It grows exponentially. That's how we notice, because we said as we approach the boundary, the points go further and further apart, right? So notice how so basically there are more than 10 to the power 100 cells in radius 1000 around you, and you will move further away during the game. Let me show. So suppose I was here. So this is a circle which has which has places which are 1 unit from me, then two, then three. Notice how as you go towards the boundary, you will find many these. So those seven distance places are very small and towards the boundary, and there are there are so many of them. So there are exactly 252 of them. While now, as I start approaching them, now they are looking very small. But if I start approaching them, they will suddenly become small. Sorry, very big as we start approaching them. So let's see if I can scroll right now. Okay, see. So consider those points which are very far from us. Let's try to move now. Okay, my bad. Just wait a minute. Main menu. Restart game. Okay, now see those. So see that green patch there, which is very far from far away from us right now, which is looking very small. But as we start moving towards it, notice how big it becomes, right? Similarly, as we start approaching these points, look how as we move near them, they become very big, but when they are very far they look very small. So this is an inherent property of the fact that a hyperbolic model has constant negative curvature. So that's all I have to offer right now. So I hope you enjoyed the session, and let me stop sharing. I hope you all enjoyed the talk and you learned some new mathematics from it. If you have any doubts regarding the talk, just unmute yourself and speak. Else, just be. I've provided my mail in the Discord server. You can ping me in the on my mail any day if you want to have any discussion. Not even if it is not related to mathematics, or if you want to discuss in general about anything. Now, one thing, I hope this motivates you to take mathematics as a career option, to see how all fields are connected in mathematics and how beautiful different interaction of these fields are. Like, so you have something like so you have something like which connects the geometry. For example, the hyperbolic plane model. It connects the geometry to analysis, to algebra, and and to combinatorics as well. So curvature, you can define basically using curvature. You can define, let's say, uh, what do you say that the Euler characteristics. There is a formula called Gauss-Bonnet theorem, which relates all these. So you have curvature. You relate curvature. You relate uh, the Euler characteristic of the surface in that formula, which is the Gauss-Bonnet theorem, which is a very interesting. topic to talk about, but unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about it. So that's it for now. I hope you all enjoyed. If you have any doubts, just ask me them right now or during the question answer session. Uh, if no doubts are there, I'll just end the meeting. Uh, okay, so okay, thank you everyone. Bye. I'm ending the meeting now. Thank you.